So your HR strategy is probably not aligned with the business strategy. We in HR are getting so much better at thinking and acting strategically, but there still is a ton of room to grow. So today we're going to answer the question about or around what does aligning your strategy, your HR strategy with your business strategy actually look like? That's coming up now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams. This is the HR Hub, and on the show we talk about anything related to HR. I encourage you to please subscribe to the show or to the podcast to keep learning from my stupendous guests. So today my guest is Nadia Uberoi. Nadia is the head of people at Garner Health, which is a fast-growing healthcare technology company. She excels at thinking about business strategy and how HR strategy should fit with that, which at Garner is helping enable their growth and helping them achieve their mission to transform the healthcare economy. I would call that a big, hairy, audacious goal. Hello, Nadia. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. Happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. So we're going to talk about business strategy, and I think there's some definitions are warranted here, though. So let's start with HR strategy. How do you define what is HR strategy, and can you help us think about, visualize what you mean by that?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, the HR strategy is the operating system that allows your business strategy to run effectively. So if you think about kind of your mission being your reason for being, like why does
Mhm.
your organization exist? Your business strategy is the path that you take to accomplish that mission. And your HR strategy is the infrastructure enabling your business strategy. It's how you hire, develop, organize, and reward talent, and kind of the environment you create so that the business can achieve its goals.
Like a lot of strategy cycles are, you put together a strategic plan and then you go and execute it. I don't know if that's relevant to you or not, but what does your strategy cycle look like, especially seeing as you're, you know, integrating it with business strategy?
Yeah. So at Garner, we have a very robust kind of planning hierarchy for strategy and prioritization, which helps ensure that every function's strategy and focuses are continually aligned with the business objectives. So kind of starting from like the top of the hierarchy, we have our mission, which as you mentioned is to transform the US healthcare economy, delivering high quality and affordable care for all. Totally an easy thing to do.
Totally.
um, totally. But so our mission does not change, right? That's our existence. That's why we exist as an organization, and that's what we're aiming to do. But how we accomplish that mission could change, right? Like that's kind of where the strategy comes in. So from there, we have our long-term plan, which is like, how are we over the long term going to achieve our mission? What is our business model, and how does that break down into potential products, phases? And this we update, every 2 years or as needed. And so for us, that's our set of actual products and incentives and data science, right? Like the way that we are actually kind of transforming this ecosystem.
Hmm. So what does your
So
HR strategy look like?
yeah, so I think so there's kind of like two parts to it. I think there's if you take the level of like our long-term plan, which is like our long-term business strategy, right? So I
Hmm.
think that the HR strategy and infrastructure that enables that is kind of our people philosophies. How do we approach people? So this is like our values and our culture, right? And our kind of our employer value proposition and our like
Hmm.
talent and total rewards philosophies, right? Some of
Hmm.
these things are like, of course, they can change over time, but they're generally, right? We have a clear kind of picture about like how do we think about these things in a way that's going to holistically help us achieve our long term business strategy from our kind of bigger picture philosophies and infrastructure, right? We also plan on an annual basis, and those are kind of the pillars that are going to enable us to make progress towards our mission in a given year. So we identify kind of the core pillars and areas of focus. Which are not necessarily like they're not specific initiatives, right? These are like it could be like improve our core user experience or launch our next phase of products or increase the impact and scale of our revenue generating teams, right? Like whatever those kind of areas of focus are that are going to kind of target the right elements of fueling our mission in that year.
Mhm.
Um, and there's not always going to be a one for one alignment of like this particular pillar is specific to the people function or the culture, right? It's not always going to be like that. But we kind of take those annual pillars, which are our business focuses for the year, and then we look at like, okay, what are the specific initiatives that we are going to tackle, and that every function is going to tackle, right? Not just the people function. And we cross collaborate on identifying those initiatives that are going to enable us to accomplish those objectives for the year. So,
Mhm.
like kind of maybe the simplest example, right? If we are trying to improve our core user experience, right? Um, what are the blockers to doing that, or what are kind of the obstacles or the things that are going to enable us to better do that, right? We need to make sure we have excellent product managers and engineers in seat. So, do we need to look at the number or quality of our product managers and engineers? Do we have a problem, any type of problem with our headcount planning process, our interviewing process, our compensation? Are we not training people correctly? Like what have been kind of the things that have not enabled us to do this in the past and that will enable us to do it in the future?
Mhm.
Like, are we losing great engineers? Why are we losing them? And then we use that information to influence like what we prioritize, and shape our underlying mechanisms.
So how do you move from your pillars, which I think are you set annually, to those things that HR is going to do? How do you how does that trickle down to activity?
It's kind of the same way that any other function would look at their priorities, right? You kind of look at what are these overarching kind of objectives for the business, right? What are the blockers or things that are going to enable us to accomplish those objectives? And how do we shape that into initiatives that we can tackle in a quarter? And
Mhm.
so it sounds a bit more idealistic probably than it actually is, right? In reality, there are things that are going to come up, right? Like that are not directly tied to annual pillars. And
Mhm.
so I think that the key for me is like making sure we are always tying back anything that comes up that we're like, okay, we need to maybe tackle this, right? Like how is it supporting those business objectives? And if it's not, then like either we don't do it or what's the reason why we are doing it.
Are some of the things that come up like, a major employee issue, like that kind of thing comes up and then you have to jump on it, you have to address it?
I think of kind of the like what I call the run the machine and the improve the machine as like two different buckets.
Oh, okay.
So like a huge portion of what my team is doing and what any HR team is doing is run the machine. And those are non-negotiables, right? Like we need to always have payroll ready, right? We need to
Right.
always address employee issues as they come up. Like those are non-negotiables. We need to run performance reviews, right? We need to like there's all these things that you do them because they are important for the business to just run itself.
Mhm.
And then there's like, okay, when I think about like planning and prioritization and strategy, right? It's like, how are we improving each of those things? If we need to improve our performance management process, that is like an improve the machine initiative. And that needs to kind of fall into our broader planning mechanism. But just running the process, like it's usually not really negotiable. If that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. I love that analogy. I love that analogy so much I have to write it down. Run the machine versus improve the machine?
Correct. Yep. Like I think of the run the machine is like it is the ecosystem, right? It is the ecosystem of HR.
Mhm.
And like everything we're doing ultimately feeds into a run the machine, right? Like if we are revamping our total reward strategy, right? Ultimately that's just feeding back into how we run our total reward strategy or programs. And so this is kind of the ecosystem, and then anything related to planning is on top of the run the machine. So if we got to tackle XYZ initiatives, like we want to do culture training, we want to do performance management revamp, we
Mhm.
want to implement a different workforce planning process, right? Whatever it might be, like that's just the scoped initiatives that are going to eventually just be implemented back into our run the machine.
So some implementations in HR take a really long time. How do you make sure, how do you remain agile during a long implementation, especially when your work is spanning multiple business cycles?
Well, I think partially this is kind of, sometimes it's embedded into the DNA of your organization
Mm.
where, we are a very young, fast, agile company that attracts and hires people who, want to move quickly, are kind of able to pivot on their feet. It is also really baked into our planning mechanisms. I think the quarterly planning process is actually really influential in enabling this. So, because when we scope our deliverables, we're scoping them in the sense of a quarter. So it's like what are the specific deliverables or metrics that we can move in this quarter instead of
Yeah.
trying to fully map out what we're going to work on for the entire next year. In these
Mhm.
like long and drawn out initiatives that take longer to have impact and make it a lot harder to pivot. So of course some initiatives and objectives will span multiple quarters, but we're still tackling them in bite-sized pieces. So if priorities or strategies change, we've already made impact from what we tackled first, right? Like we moved that metric or we delivered that particular module in that quarter, and we're able to kind of adapt quickly from there without having wasted effort.
So often clients will come, or your partners, like your peers, come and ask you to do something that you weren't planning to deliver. And that maybe, in your opinion, is not aligned with the business strategy, with the HR strategy. How are you handling those?
Well, I always listen, right? Of course, like I want to
Yeah.
understand, right? Where's it coming from? And so even if it's not intuitively for me aligned, right? There's always some value there. And at the very least, I can explain why we're not prioritizing it. But I point us back to our planning hierarchy. And it is, I guess, a little bit easier at Garner because everyone understands the planning hierarchy,
Right.
right? It's not like people are going to be like offended that you didn't prioritize their thing, right? It's like no, this is how we do the planning process, and we very much welcome and solicit feedback and input on what's important to employees, what's important to leaders, things like that. But it's just one input into how we think about overarching planning. We're never going to just like tackle something, like I explained to them, we're never just going to like kind of tackle something or stray from the plan just because one or two or three employees suggested it. It's just that input into our broader prioritization without becoming kind of reactive to things that don't have as direct of an impact on enabling the business strategy. And a lot of times the things that people suggest are very important and will be impactful,
Yes.
but you
Yes.
still have to make trade-offs, so you can't tackle everything at once.
So, what advice would you offer to HR professionals who are trying to shift from becoming customer or client focused, where we jump every time the customer or client says jump, to being more business focused?
I think,
I
yeah,
think
I
this
think it would. Sorry, go ahead.
I think this is such an important question.
I think again, it starts a bit with the why of like why is the current mindset the customer focus? Because I think sometimes there is value in that, right?
Totally.
If you're in a client
Totally.
services company, you're a consultant, like right, whatever it is, like sometimes that is like a core part of the fabric that is actually going to enable your business objectives. Like even, at Chewy, for example, when I worked at Chewy for 4 years, and part of the business strategy was being customer obsessed, right? Like
Mhm.
that was a
Yes.
huge part of the values, and like we delight our customers and like have such a customer centric approach. So of course we need to implement that kind of mindset with the way we serve our employees. So it was part of a broader fabric. Now that's not to say that one employee in a 20,000 person organization suggests something and we go and like jump and do that, right? It's still just one input. But so I think I start with that why, right? Because sometimes there is value in that. But then I would kind of shift the mindset to like, okay, well, how does planning and prioritization work for every other function of the organization? Because the reality to me is that it should not be any different, right? How does any other function think about their priorities and their planning? Like I'm sure it's not or I'm not sure, but likely it's not just jumping on everything that everyone asks of them. Like you get a one bad review on whatever, review platform, you're not just going to go like drop everything to prioritize that one thing. And so I would think about like, yeah, how is the rest of the business thinking about prioritization, and like how can we align the people prioritization into those kind of same processes and mentalities?
This is a bit of a pet question because I consult to small, medium businesses that are growing. So I think Garner's right now around 400 employees. What is something you wished had been prioritized, whether you or someone else, earlier in Garner's growth?
This is probably a relatively non-conventional answer because they're actually most of the kind of core people infrastructure that I tend to see organizations forget to prioritize early on. Like we actually did, or not me, but whomever was there in the early years. Our CEO is very bought into this, which helps a lot. But one of the things now, like hindsight's 2020, when we are trying to scale extremely rapidly, and like part of our talent strategy is hiring like really, really high caliber talent. And we are trying to hire a lot of them. And so I wish that we had really thought about our employer value proposition, or EVP, and how we brand ourselves as an employer to attract the right talent. Because in reality, right, we should be able to kind of attract and hire the same levels of talent as a lot of really well-known employers are able to at this point, but there's just a little bit lesser known and less clear branding around what we offer as an employer, and why you might want to kind of work here. And so it now takes a little bit more effort to scale at the pace
Mhm.
that we're trying to scale at without kind of sacrificing, of course, quality.
That was useful. That was personally useful to me. Thank you. And that's funny because right after we record, I'm going to an EVP session to help a client develop their.
Nice.
So I want to understand sort of the cadence of activities and who's involved. So I think the right level to get you to walk us through this is at the quarterly level. What meetings happen? What meetings happen before HR gets involved? What meetings happen with you? And then what meetings are you having and expectations are you setting for your HR department?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it starts with each quarter. It starts with meetings at the leadership level, right? On how are we tracking against our annual pillars for the year, and what needs work and why, right? So like what are kind of some of the key either blockers or enablers to accomplish those objectives. So there starts with kind of like a more high level strategic conversation. And then there's I would say kind of a series of, okay, how does that break down into each of the specific functions? And this is where I think, I don't have a super clean answer for this because it is a bit of top down and bottom up, right? So I'm talking to my team about
Mhm.
the pain points and like things like what feedback are we getting, right? And how like, what are we kind of experiencing on the ground? And then also getting this kind of like lateral, right, from different leaders across the business and with the executive team, of like what are kind of some of the things that they might suggest from a people perspective. And I'm talking to my boss about like the CEO about like what do we think will be kind of the high ROI initiatives to kind of make a dent. And like I said, they're not always going to be a one for one with a specific annual pillar, right? Sometimes there's just what's the word, like just either like kind of cleanup or infrastructure building to be done. That's like more of kind of a long-term objective. And then other times it's like, okay, we need to actually tackle this very targeted thing to enable us to accomplish this pillar. Um, and then there's kind of like a refinement process. And that's where we list out some options. Like then we actually scope it into clear objectives and deliverables. So like I mentioned earlier, like what can we realistically tackle in this quarter? Um, and what are the cross-functional dependencies? That's a key component because you can't plan in isolation, right? You often need involvement from the other functions. Um, and that way you also kind of get a little bit more feedback on your proposed deliverables and things like that.
How does this translate into people doing things? What's the process for getting, your HR staff to actually do stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it comes down to clear ownership and accountability, right? So every quarterly priority has an owner.
Oh,
And so that person is responsible for getting the thing done. Of course, they're not the only person involved. Like if I have a, deliverable to my name, right? Of course I'm using my team to accomplish those deliverables, but I'm ultimately the accountable party, the responsible party for that thing. So I think at the end of the day, it's like this is your job because the deliverable was assigned to you, and there's some
mhm.
kind of, I would say we do emphasize that pretty heavily in our kind of performance mechanisms, right? Did this person accomplish their quarterly deliverables?
Okay. Do you have software that assists you guys in doing all of this?
We don't. In the quarterly planning process is still done in spreadsheets.
Okay. I was hopeful you would say something else.
I
Okay.
know, I know. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're very conscientious of system proliferation. Like there's like
Mm.
not having a different software for everything, right? There's so many solutions out there and like
Oh,
having
there
all
sure
the different,
are.
and we also have, I would say, like very sophisticated people who can design very sophisticated spreadsheets, and a lot of systems out there are just sophisticated spreadsheets with a better UI. So,
Yes.
um, so we're a little bit wary of that, but generally more like in other types of processes, more tech enabled.
Right. Interesting. Okay. There was a lot in that too. All right. Where can someone find you and Garner?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Nadia Uberoi, and you can learn more about Garner at getgarner.com.
Okay. All right. I'll put links to those in the show notes. Well, thanks, Nadia. That was really insightful and helpful, actually, from a number of angles. I'm thinking about that high level strategy, but also the process that you articulated around that. The other thing I'm thinking about, which I think is useful to HR everywhere, is running the machine versus improving the machine. If you out there had some other takeaway, please share that in the comments. I also did an episode on strategic workforce planning with almost the, I don't know, godfather of strategic workforce planning. He certainly wrote the book on it. And a link to that is right here. Thanks for watching out there. We'll see you next time.